What is up, guys? Welcome back to Disclosure Team. I'm your host, Vinnie Adams. Following is an interview with David Marler. David is the Executive Director of the National UFO Historical Records Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. If you enjoy this content, please take a second to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, comment down below, and share it with your friends. I hope you enjoy this interview with David Marler.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Look at that thing, dude.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real.
Non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
So, David, welcome back to the show. It's so good to see you again. How's things been?
It has been very busy, Vinny. Let me just tell you, there's been a lot going on, and really anxious to share it with you and your audience.
Fantastic. I mean, you have been on the show before, but before we kind of get into the recent news that you have, it'd be great if we can just touch upon a few sort of things again. So first of all, could you just explain how this archive first came about and what the original goal and plan was with it?
Absolutely. Well, I think we should go back in time and into the Wayback Machine, back to 1990, when I first got actively involved in the UFO subject. I had an interest during my entire childhood, as many of us did, with regard to the subject. But in 1990, I always like to reflect back on that. When I became an investigator for MUFON at the time, I thought, well, if I'm going to go out and investigate, I need to know what I'm talking about. So I started going to all of the local libraries, naively thinking I could check out books on the UFO subject. To my shock and dismay, there were little or no books at the library on the UFO subject. So in 1990, I just, like many of us and many of your audience members, started collecting books on the subject. Never did I realize it would evolve into this thing, this monster that's kind of developed a life of its own. But over the successive years and decades being involved in the field, have forged some really incredible friendships and alliances, as I know you have, in the UFO community. Many of these individuals, though, that I was networking with starting in 1990 moving forward were individuals that were middle-aged, men and women that were in their 50s, 60s. And, fast forward in time where we're at now, they're now in their 80s, 90s in some cases. Just 2 weeks ago, we secured a wonderful collection, actually a series of collections from Ohio, from a gentleman named Rick Hilberg and Tom Wertman. And we were able to secure two very classic collections there from the Cleveland Ufology Project and the UFO Research Committee of Akron, Ohio. Literally original case files going back to the 1950s. So it's kind of a snowball effect. The more that people heard about us, and I in an interview earlier this week with local media, I said, the concept of the larger the mass, the more gravitational pull. The larger this library gets, I think we get a stronger gravitational pull because all these people are coming out of the woodwork wanting to donate materials. But we started initially collecting, individual items, small collections, and then obviously the cornerstones of, and why we call it the National UFO Historical Record Center. We have the case files of civilian saucer intelligence from the 1950s, NICAP. Very happy to say we finally have secured the APRO files as of last November, and also the Center for UFO Studies, or CUFOS, in addition to Dr. J. Allen Hynek's original Project Blue Book documents. And some of those are actually missing Blue Book files. So it's an incredible treasure trove on top of the microfilm, the news clippings, the magazines, the journals, and international in scope. We're focused on the nation's history as it relates to this, but Mr. Philip Mantle sent his collection out from the UK last March. We're in touch with some South American researchers who have expressed interest in donating their files. And then, as you can appreciate, APRO had many international ties, especially in South America. And we have a ton of original South American material going back to the 50s and 60s through Dr. Olavo Fontes, who they were in touch with and who they corresponded with. So an incredible treasure trove of just international UFO history. And, the issue that we ran into, though, was we were not short on resources, i.e., informational sources, but we were getting, as you can imagine, progressively shorter on square footage as we continue to get all these collections. The APRO files alone encompass 13 file cabinets and 60 boxes of material. That's just one collection. In 2 weeks, that same gentleman is bringing out an additional 1,000 APRO case files that he stumbled across that he didn't bring out initially, in addition to other organizational case files and original materials that was owned by Dr. Hynek.
Wow, that is unbelievable. What's the process like for actually cataloging them when you get them?
Well, have you ever heard the term drinking water out of a fire hose? That's what it is pretty much like, as you can imagine. Some of these collections, are very well organized. The Ohio collections that I referenced were meticulously organized, which is rare. Other collections we received, like the APRO files, the 60 boxes that we had been safe kept for 35 years and stored away. But there was really not much rhyme or reason to the organization. So the end of November into December into January of this year, I literally every free moment I had was trying to get some semblance of order with regard to that material. It is now organized. And in fact, the file cabinet here and the ones behind me have the original historic APRO case files. We've had a lot of requests for people to come see them, and they've been very patient, and I appreciate their patience. But very soon here, we are going to make it available to the general public in person and eventually digitally. That's the question we always have people post on social media. Well, when are you going to digitize this? When we get the funding and when we get the volunteers is the short answer to that. Everyone wants this to happen, but it requires resources. And as a nonprofit organization, obviously, much like most nonprofits, we don't have a rich cash flow coming in. And so we're looking for donors, donations, foundations, actually, especially in light of our new partnership.
So in the past, I know you've had some well-known faces come to the archive and utilize it. So could you just give us an overview, maybe just some of the names that we might recognize who have been there over the years?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the ones I think your audience would be most acquainted with, of course, is Mr. Ross Coulthard. Ross, his initial documentary, he's done a number of them now, but his initial documentary, he was out here filming in New Mexico and wanted to stop by and film the archives. And I was happy to be part of that production with him. A very fine gentleman to work with, I will tell you. We were happy to assist him. A few years prior to that, we were helping James Fox with his latest documentary as well. And James just found a treasure trove of material. In fact, we were at an event together last year in 2023, and he had remarked to the audience that and he had mentioned it to me personally prior to that, I couldn't have done the first hour of the documentary without the archives. And so I think it underscores the value that we provide. Also, Mark Hartzman, author from New York, just wrote a book this past year, and he came and was able to derive tons of visual elements to incorporate into the book. And so those are some of the larger names. Recently, we had Mr. Patrick Ferren from Brussels, Belgium, who is part of the SOBEPS group investigating triangles. He and his wife were on a nationwide tour, just traveling around, having holiday here in the United States. And we had an opportunity to meet again because we had met back around the 2018 timeframe when he was in the United States. In 2 weeks, we will also have representatives, production crew from the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, who are working on a major documentary that I think your audience would be very impressed with. Very high caliber. I always tell people privately that for every production that I'm involved with, there's 6 or 7 that I've turned down. And of course, you and your audience know there's just this proliferation of UFO documentaries out there. I'm interested in quality, not quantity. And I have outright rejected many of these documentaries that famous names that I won't mention, gravitate towards because it's another check in hand. And I don't care about money. I don't care about profiteering from this subject. What I do care about is an accurate retelling of the history and ensuring that it's factually accurate and that the attention to detail as it relates to verbally retelling the story, but also visually retelling the story accurately. I think it's important. We talk about in the UFO community how the government has spread disinformation. I would put forth to you, Vinny, and you've probably experienced this as well. There are some nefarious individuals within the UFO community that disseminates more disinformation, in my opinion, than what I've ever seen the government do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched there upon the importance of the history and that. Could you possibly just expand on that, why it's so vital, especially in a subject like this?
Absolutely. Well, the old phrase, nature abhors a vacuum. If we don't provide an accurate history predicated on the original documents, in other words, when I lecture, I always cite my sources. And when I reference anything on a podcast like this, I have the original documents right here that I can back it up with. Many UFO researchers out there, under references, it would just be their backside and then IBID, because they're just pulling things out of thin air. And you're left, in absence of having any factual evidence or provenance of information, you're left to basically have a faith-based belief in this individual. You're left to either believe or disbelieve in absence of anything to tie it together. And, an example of this is, of course, our mutual friend, Graham Rendell. He does a wonderful job of telling the history. Everything he states is predicated on official government military documents, and he has the provenance, he has the documents. I know a lot of people approach the UFO subject with their heart versus their mind. A lot of people, they are emotionally drawn into stories of whistleblowers and conspiracies. But at the end of the day, it's really entertainment, because if you can't verify or back up any of the information that these people are telling you, it's more entertainment value than educational value. And that's something with our partnership that our partners, who we'll talk about here shortly, who are offering us facilities for this archive, they get it. They get what we are talking about as far as history predicated on official government and military and civilian documents.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this process to where you're at now, where, the archive is so big that it needed this extra space. I mean, I'm sure this has been something that you've been dealing with for a year, two or more. Can you give us that backstory where you were kind of really realizing this?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first, I'm going to pause and give my wife credit, because she has the patience of a saint. I've got to give her credit, my wife, Kendra. She was very supportive when I suggested possibly doing a new addition onto the house to accommodate this growing collection of history. And she appreciates history for history's sake as well. And we put on a 20 by 22 foot room, which I'm in right now, to accommodate the collection as it stood. Now, this was in 2017. Again, small collections coming in, and relatively large private collections like Antonio Huneeus's vast international archive of material, Mr. Bill Pitts and others that we've acquired over the years, the Dr. Leon Davidson correspondence collection going back to the 1950s. All of these collections started trickling in, but as you can appreciate, in November of 2020, we made an arrangement with the Center for UFO Studies, of which I'm their chief archivist, to relocate the files here to help with the digitization, because we're very close to digitizing all of the NICAP and CUFOS case files. So once that project's done, we look to start working on the APRO files to make those available. But you can imagine that we had a lot of room, and then suddenly in November 2020, we had 15 file cabinets that started to occupy space here. Then in November of just last year, as I referenced at the beginning of the show, 13 file cabinets of APRO material. So these are large collections, very quickly occupying space in the archive room here. We actually have 2 offsite facilities as well, because we've acquired the collection of my late friend Lee Spiegel, as well as other individuals in the last year and a half who have passed. So we have, I always like to say this is the showroom. I just told a photographer that earlier this week. This is just the showroom with some of the more rare elements. But I believe now we have a total of, I want to make sure I get between 8 to 10 pallets of material that are in deep storage right now, which once we make this move and relocate to our new facilities, all of that material will be readily accessible and will be archived and cataloged appropriately.
I mean, with the sheer amount and volume of documents, could it be that you have some real hidden gems still waiting to be discovered within the archive?
Absolutely. One I can mention, I had it teed up here because this is something that I just recently mentioned on a local newscast as far as cases that people aren't aware of. I've only had time to do a cursory review of the APRO files, just given everything that's taking place right now. But one of the things that I found, and I should back up and preface this by stating, Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who founded the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, or APRO, in the mid to late 1950s, actually had APRO based right here. I'll pause there. Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who founded APRO, actually were based here in New Mexico in the mid to late 1950s. As a result, it had always been discussed and rumored that they had inside connections at Holloman Air Force Base and White Sands Proving Ground. What I was surprised by, though, in going through the APRO files, I found original unknown radar track report documents. These are the originals from Kirtland Air Force Base. Now, 2 or 3 of these, I will tell you, could be attributed to atmospheric phenomenon. They were just one radar picking up one anomalous target. That doesn't impress me too much. This one made me stand up and take notice. And I will mention, after I discovered this, I immediately went over to the Blue Book files that we have to see if I could correlate this with what we already have on file. This is not part of the official Air Force Project Blue Book case file collection. This may, in fact, be the only documents that attest to this event. It was leaked by a gentleman who I won't mention by name, who was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base. This is September 13th, 1959. I'll read you a synopsis that's on the cover sheet. At first thought to be electronics interference, but was ruled out because of the speeds, course, and so many radar stations picking it up. A total of 4 stations tracked this UFO, and they use UFO in the document. Now, on the back, they have a grid map showing the directions of the object in question over New Mexico. Actually, Mexico, New Mexico, and Texas is where this thing traversed. Now, this gives a little bit of additional detail, the handwritten letter from the individual that provided it. It states, on the night of September 13th, an unknown object was picked up by radar about 120 miles below the international border in Mexico. Within 12 minutes, this object had crossed the border and disappeared some 200 miles inside the United States. Speed was timed at 32 miles a minute, or an average of 1,920 miles per hour. Fastest was 2,445 miles per hour. And it goes on with a few additional details. Now, 1,920 miles to 2,445 miles per hour. This is September of 1959. In December of that year, just about 3 months later, I stumbled across this news item. Convair F-106 sets record as world's fastest jet aircraft. On December 1st, 1959, an F-106 all-weather interceptor roared to a new world speed record of 1,525 miles per hour. So we clearly didn't have anything that could move that fast, and more specifically, as it reflected on the cover sheet, moving at those speeds and at those courses. It was making angular turns at extremely high velocity. But this is just one of the discoveries that we found just going through the APRO files. And again, this literally had been locked away for 35 years, only to be discovered. And that's just one of many that we can talk about.
That's incredible. I love things like that. That really, I get such a buzz out of hearing stories like that. Some of my best cases are from the 50s. I think it's just amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's incredible information. And again, to have the official documentation. We're not relying on things off the internet, which I would love to touch on this if I can, Vinnie. I've had some discussions with people that say, well, this stuff can all be digitized and we don't need the original documents. I completely beg to differ. I think we're seeing a proliferation on the internet right now of images being created utilizing AI technology. And let's be honest, anybody can forge government documents nowadays. A high school kid can do it. You know, whether you attribute that to MJ-12 documents or the subsequent MJ-12 documents that have come out, or any other spurious documents that are out there without an established provenance. The problem is, even if we took this document and scanned it, created a PDF, and let's say this one disappears, rightly so, 30 or 40 years from now, Vinnie, people could look at that on the internet or whatever it's going to be 30, 40 years from now, whatever they're going to call it, whatever incarnation it has. And legitimately, they could say, how do we know this is based on an original document? And the only way you can do that is by having the original paper, the original ink, the original envelopes postmarked with the addresses from where they originated from. It is extremely important, if we want to maintain an accurate retelling of history, to have the original source documents. I just feel that that's extremely important right now. And I know a lot of people are focused on 2004 moving forward, but something that I've been trying to impart to friends that I know that are in DC is you need to appreciate the history. The history provides context for what is being reported today by military and civilian reporters. And people are starting to look at 2004 moving forward and thinking they're finding discoveries when in fact, these are the things that we were discovering 40, 50 years ago. In fact, last year, the year before, I met with Lou Elizondo and I was sitting on a panel. I said, with all due respect to my friend sitting here, he describes the 5 observables. When I first heard of that, it wasn't anything that was a revelation, because all of these characteristics, as we know, Vinny, and much of your audience knows, all of these characteristics were being documented in case files going back to the 1940s and 50s.
It was. Completely. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. It really makes you think. Have you ever had, and we were talking there about the authenticity of documents. Have you ever had any issues over the years with documents where it's felt off or something's felt off to the point where you've had to get them, verified?
None of the ones that I've had, only because I know the sources they came from. They came through official channels. For example, Dr. J. Allen Hynek's original Project Blue Book files. Those literally came from Hynek to the Center for UFO Studies. They are still property of the Center for UFO Studies, although they're being housed here at the National UFO Historical Records Center. So in those cases, we know the established provenance. I've had people send me documents, I will tell you, over the years, and most of it is just stuff they pulled off the internet. And I always state that the information is only as good as the provenance you can establish with regard to these documents. And so obviously, and I'm not speaking for our organization because we have a position of neutrality regarding the UFO subject. We're not here to endorse or refute anything. We're here to provide all of the history. But me personally, knowing the history of MJ12 and the backstory and how all of that developed, I put no stock whatsoever in those documents. And I take issue with some of the so-called historians, researchers that do think that they are credible, because for those that know the backstory and how this all developed, that in fact, it was a fictional story originally written by 2 or 3 very nefarious characters from UFO history. And then it evolved into suddenly these documents that appeared, which I always say they're not documents, they're photos of purported documents.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. It really
and
is.
I know I'll suffer the ire of about half your audience by calling MJ12 out, but prove me wrong. At the end of the day, all of us, myself included, if we're going to make a claim, you have to have evidence to back it up. It is not my job to refute claims. If you're making extraordinary claims, to kind of paraphrase Carl Sagan, it demands extraordinary evidence. And so for those that believe in certain ideas or themes or memes that are circulating regarding UFOs, for example, that we back engineered crashed UFOs, and most of the things being seen today are our technology. Great idea, interesting hypothesis. How do you test? How do you prove that?
No, exactly. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You can believe all you want, but you can't, lay it down solidly until you have that evidence to back it up completely. That makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. And much of what we have, I wasn't there in 59 when this radar event took place, but we do have the contemporaneous documents through official sources. But I still can't say that necessarily happened. What I can do as a historian, though, is provide the documentation to interested parties.
100%. Yeah, that's it. So let's jump back onto this timeline of, the archive bursting at the seams, as it were. How do you even begin starting looking for a facility out, to house this?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I started by doing local TV news media and local radio shows. And I will tell you, unlike some other markets that I've been in with regard to the UFO subject here in the United States across the last 20, 30 years, New Mexico, by virtue of the fact that it's so closely associated with the UFO subject through Roswell and other things, Socorro, New Mexico, Aztec, etc., they are very open to the subject here in the state of New Mexico, and the media is very open to properly reporting it. In other words, in the 12 years that I've lived here and done various news segments, I've never had the tongue-in-cheek or the eye roll or the X-Files music playing in the background. They treat it as a very normal, sober subject. Just like local politics or crime in Albuquerque, now we're moving over to UFOs. And They've done a great job. I've established some great relationships with the TV newscasters as well as radio personalities. And it was really by virtue of starting there. And then it evolved into getting in touch with city and county politicians. And I brought them to the archives. The mayor of Rio Rancho has been here to see the archives firsthand. And seeing is believing, at least as it relates to the archive. I can't say that about UFOs per se, but with regard to the archives, for them to be able to come and see the original documents, going back 75 plus years. The mayor was very interested, and the county was very interested. The chairman of Sandoval County, where I live, actually requested that I come and present this to the commissioners meeting last May. And I presented it, ironically, the day after I had given a lecture at Kirtland Air Force Base, where I was invited to speak. And so I had an opportunity to convey this. And, knowing your audience is kind of public speaking 101. And so one of the things I wanted to work in, because they're probably not personally interested in preserving UFO history, what I tried to convey to them was this could be a huge economic boon to the community. This can draw people in nationally and internationally that would like to come and do research, as evidenced by the Canadian Broadcast Corporation that'll be here in 2 weeks, as I mentioned. So that spoke to them. And I remarked to one of the politicians afterwards, you don't have to believe in little green men, but you can believe in little green dollars. And so anything that can contribute revenue to the county and the city, certainly they're interested in. That being said, I don't want to go down the path of things like the Roswell UFO Museum. We want it to drive tourism, but we don't want it to be a tourism trap that kind of, appeals to pop culture. We really want to elevate the dialogue, move the conversation beyond Roswell here in New Mexico, because as you know, Vinnie, there's so many great cases, well-documented cases other than Roswell that we need to be talking about. And so we want to expand that dialogue predicated on the original documents, audio recordings, video, photos, etc., microfilm that we have here, and also appeal not just to the general public. We are situated here in Albuquerque, for those that may not be familiar, in a unique location. We have Sandia National Laboratories right here next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. Just north of where I live, we also have Los Alamos National Laboratories. We have an incredible brain trust of scientists. And I mention that because over the years, giving lectures in the Albuquerque area, I almost every single time have had someone come up from the audience and pull me aside. And in a hushed voice, they would look to their left, they would look to their right to see who was standing around. They would say, I really appreciate your grounded approach towards the UFO subject. By the way, I'm a research scientist at Sandia, or I'm a research scientist at Los Alamos. Now, I've said that for years in interviews, but what was interesting is when we received the APRO files, we didn't just receive the case files, we received all of their correspondence, all their administrative files, including card catalogs with all of their subscribers to their UFO newsletter and field investigator networks. One of the cards that I found, actually a series of cards, were postcards to and from Los Alamos National Laboratory. Los Alamos, as we have documented on the APRO cards, was a paying subscriber to the APRO Bulletin. Now I ask you, why would they subscribe to a UFO bulletin if they didn't put some level of import into the subject?
That is incredible.
And it's incredible to have the originals actually postmarked from the 1970s, 1980s from Los Alamos, requesting back issues and subscribing over and over and over, year after year, to the APRO Bulletin.
That's unreal. Oh my goodness.
So I always tell people, don't tell me scientists aren't interested in this subject. They are, as evidenced by that.
I love that so much. That's incredible.
That was another aha moment as we were going through the APRO files.
That's blown my mind. So yeah, let's move on to a building. How do you even judge or future-proof a site? Knowing how big it's going to get.
Yeah, well, beggars can't be choosers. I hate to say, I'm very humble in saying this, that we were desperately trying to find any additional square footage. And so ultimately, meeting with the politicians led us to have dialogue with the Rio Rancho Public School system. And we started bringing administrators here, much like the mayor, much like the county commissioner that I'd mentioned. And they saw the archives and they got it. I always say, people either get it or they get it, that this is a traditional historical archive, albeit dedicated to a non-traditional subject. And we literally had at least 15 to 18 meetings over the course of the last year and a half. Ironically enough, this past Monday, June 24th, was the school board meeting to take the vote. Now, I told them, and I will tell your audience, of course, June 24th has a little bit of baggage, right? It just happens to be the anniversary of the Kenneth Arnold sighting. So how ironic we have this monumental decision and vote on the anniversary of Kenneth Arnold's sighting. I told the school board when I was presenting, I would be remiss as a historian if I didn't point this out to you. That it's so ironic that the meeting just happens to be on this day. But I presented a final, petition for needed space and reviewing everything that we had discussed up to that point. Unanimous vote across the entire school board and administration to move forward with this project. Not one negative naysayer on the school board or administrators, not one negative naysayer on the county commission. And someone just messaged me on social media this morning saying, well, be careful, you're dealing with politics and certain parties might not want this. I said, we have bipartisan support by local government. I shook hands with commissioners that are Republicans and Democrats, unanimous support on the part of the county commissioners, as well as I mentioned, the mayor. So we have the community support. We now have the school system support. What they will be offering us are two facilities side by side that encompass 2,600 square feet of space. We have in the showroom here only 440 square feet. And as I mentioned, all the pallets that are in storage. That will accommodate us for the short term, but we're already talking about a phase 2 project where we'll be moving to a secondary site within the school system that has even much more square footage because, again, these collections are continuing to pour in. We estimate another 10 to 12 smaller collections that we'll be receiving over the course of the next year. So we always have to be forward thinking as it relates to all of these acquisitions coming in.
And of course, I'm sure there are people just chomping at the bit to get in there and start looking through these documents. What's the plan kind of in place to kind of open that up to the public?
Yeah, that's a great. I'm glad we're going down this road because the devil are in the details, as they say. We are a volunteer organization. I work for a living. I have a normal 9-to-5 job, as most of my core group of volunteers here in Albuquerque do. We do have a few that are retired, but the bulk of us all have day jobs. So by virtue of that, we have to work around our work schedules. But what we envision is, and there's a few reasons why we're envisioning it this way. One is security, as you can appreciate. Original government military documents, we want to ensure the integrity of that collection. So that's one factor that we took into consideration. The other thing is security overall, but also controlled access. Many individuals that come to our facilities, as I mentioned, some of these Los Alamos Sandia laboratory scientists, they want to go to a credible location where they can access these original documents, but they would never set foot in, say, the Roswell UFO Museum where someone might recognize them, or they don't want any attention. They would like to do this somewhat surreptitiously. So the way we've designed it is you'll be able to go to our website, submit a form where you request certain dates, times that you would like to visit the archives, allowing for at least 2 weeks advance notice. And then we will try to accommodate those requests by ensuring we can rally our volunteers to ensure someone is there to help guide you and wayfind when you're in the archives. That will ensure, like I said, controlled access to the facility. It'll allow an individual to have unafforded access to the material without rubbing shoulders with 2 or 20 other people. And so for serious researchers, I think that's important because I know when I sit here behind me and I'm going through the material, I don't want anybody to bother me. I'm extremely laser focused in trying to look at this material. And admittedly, for those that can't afford to travel to Albuquerque to access this material firsthand, we want to make sure it's worth their time and worth their treasury to do that. We want to ensure that they have total focused access on the collection and there's not going to be any distractions. So that's kind of how we envision it, at least for now. Phase 2, we may change things. We don't know. We'll have to see. I just reached out to our army of volunteers who have contacted me in doing local radio and local TV. Every time it goes out, we get someone saying, I would love to volunteer my time. So I just started contacting them in light of the fact we have the press release from the school board. We have local media coverage that just hit this week. And so it's a very exciting time. In the history of the United States, I don't think we've ever seen a UFO organization or historical organization partner with a public school system. Now, they're not just giving us these facilities. There's a quid pro quo here that we have to point out. In addition to them providing these facilities for us, what they want us to do in turn is to provide education to the students. Now, many people think, oh, you're going to lecture about UFOs. Yes, I'm going to lecture about UFOs, but in discussions that we had, the many meetings we had, we will obviously address the history of UFOs, and obviously here in Albuquerque, specific to the state of New Mexico, to talk about local history. Beyond that, though, we want to use this as a springboard to inspire kids to learn more about physics and atmospheric phenomenon, radar, astronomy, utilizing critical thinking skills, objectivity, the investigative process. And I like to say that in the files, and for any UFO investigator that's out there, they know this, the majority of UFO reports we get turn out to be IFOs, identified flying objects. These are great learning tools for the kids because we can give them a scenario where this UFO was reported in this way, described by the witness as such, but the investigation ensued, and what we found was X, Y, and Z. And it turned out it was not a UFO, it was a Navy skyhook balloon seen at high altitude that happened to be catching the late evening rays of the sun that was illuminating against the dark sky. And so these are the types of things we can talk about. Or someone saw an object that was moving and suddenly it made this abrupt turn and started moving in a different direction. We can talk about atmospheric physics and how there's winds aloft data, how different strata of air currents can move in different directions at different speeds. And they really are excited about how we can use this as a vehicle to teach them, because they said, we have difficulty getting kids to learn about mathematics, science, physics. We see this as an innovative and creative way to engage the students and weave in elements of mainstream science.
That is such an amazing agreement, and everyone benefits. I think that's wonderful.
It's a win-win, and it's something that I have to tell you, Vinnie, having lectured across North America for many years, it's going to be extremely important to be able to lecture to the school kids. And this will be elementary all the way up into high school age ranges that we'll be dealing with. And so the initial contract is for the first 5 years, we'll have the contract in place, again, with the idea that we may be moving to a phase 2 building at some point in the first year or two. And then we'll conduct a series of lectures each year for the students. In addition, though, and this was not my making, this was the making of the school system, they also worked in, we would like you to provide 2 administrative lectures to our faculty and our teachers and our staff on the UFO subject. We think they should also be educated on the history. So I really welcome that opportunity, and perhaps even have some of the physics teachers that could be consultants to help come and help in the archives and make sense out of some of the scientific papers that we have that maybe I can't understand or some of my colleagues can't. So it's the beautiful thing is also, we're not relegated to the UFO community anymore. We are now an integral part of the local community, the city and the county, by virtue of this affiliation with the public school system. And I know they're excited, and I'm equally excited. And we're kind of pioneering this. And in fact, I had someone reach out to me through the internet, through social media recently, and they said, I would love to work with the schools in my area. And I said, well, hopefully we can be a template. You're right. This establishes a precedent that then other school systems can maybe mirror or mimic.
Absolutely. It's so encouraging. It really does. It really could help push other areas to do the same. I don't see how they wouldn't want to go with something like that.
And we want to instill a robust curiosity, but tempered by healthy skepticism. That's one of the things we keep coming back to. Finding that balance, be open-minded, but skeptical, which, Vinnie, when I was growing up, that's what my dad always imparted to me. My dad was interested in UFOs, but he always cautioned me, be open-minded, look at the data, but be skeptical. And I've always tried to kind of walk that line my entire life, thanks to my dad.
Yes, best way to be, data-driven, open-minded, like you said. Yeah, for sure. Out of curiosity, you mentioned that, when you've been receiving these collections, they come in boxes, filing cabinets, and, you house it all. How do you deal with these documents wearing out over time, or what's the kind of, because obviously, you say you're not funded by anyone, and to have a climate controlled atmosphere to house it all, may not be an instant thing. So how do you deal with that?
Well, it is temperature humidity controlled, the facility we will be going into, which is wonderful. In fact, when we went into the area, it wasn't an air-conditioned facility. And the chief operating officer of the public school system told the director of operations, oh, no. He goes, we need air conditioner units in here. He goes, they have original military documents going back to the 40s. It has to be temperature, humidity controlled, in addition to a number of security measures, I might add, that are also being employed with the facility. Security bars, security cameras inside and outside the facility. We are not taking security lightly. So I want to emphasize that point. But yes, with regard to the facility, I'm sorry, what was the question?
It was just, how do you plan going forward when, you haven't, will they be housed in a certain way? Will they be handled with gloves, or like, what's the process?
Yes. Well, yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. Sorry, I've had so many interviews this entire week since the press release. My mind's mush. I'm surprised I still have a voice today. One of the things that we're going to be teaching the kids, and this is something that the school system lit up on, was try to inspire kids to pursue areas in library sciences, and document curation. One of the things that my daughter is helping me with currently is taking all of these old files that go back 40, 50, 60 years. And many of these news clippings were glued onto backing sheets in the case files. Almost every single one has deplaned, has just separated over time. The problem was and this is the things we want to teach the kids about. The old style glue had a lot of acid, and it burns images into the paper. It sometimes makes documents completely illegible over time. So we want to talk to them about, this is the damage that's done by some of these old methods of securing these things, talking about acid-free glue and also employing acid-free paper to ensure archival quality. And we can't reverse the damage that's been done, but we can halt the damage from spreading and going further. We even have, Vinnie, in the NICAP files going back to the 1950s, we had some of the old chemically treated photostats that happen to be in a file with other papers, and the neighboring papers on the front and back of that sheet had scars burned in to the point where you can't even read these documents from the acid that was on that one particular piece of paper. So, these are things the UFO community might not be interested in, but these are things that we can teach the kids about. And how do we mitigate, or how do we halt any further damage to these documents? And so we really look at doing that. They also want me to help form UFO clubs for the high schools if they're interested. We're going to be doing a focus group in August, the first week in August, right before we move into the new facilities, because they're currently being renovated. And we're going to have teachers and individuals there to talk to some of the students and ask them, what are you interested in? Because, I'm 55 years old. I don't know what teenagers want. I don't know what grade school kids want anymore. I'm several generations removed, but we want to bring them in and say, regarding UFOs, what questions do you have? What things would you like to hear about? And let's try to make it, make it of value to the students to ensure that it's addressing their interests, their questions, their needs.
Wonderful. So where can people kind of keep up with this move as it happens, and keep an eye on what you're up to?
Yes, we're going to be revamping our website very soon in preparation for moving into the new facilities. And again, eventually having visitors. I will add to what my earlier statement mentioned about scheduling appointments. We'll be moving in tentatively in August, and I can't give you a time frame. We're still waiting on renovations, and that could be delayed. We plan on moving in August. It could be the beginning, middle, or end of August. September, October will be a time period where we're going to be organizing the archives. Sometime in October, the portal will go live on our website where people can reach out and contact us. But as you can imagine, the amount of material we have in moving this, for all of us that have moved just a home, we know how stressful that can be. Imagine moving an entire historical archive. That's this vast. So we at least need 2 months to get some rudimentary organization, and hopefully in end of October, beginning of November timeframe, we can start entertaining visitors. And since we received the APRO files last November, I already have a list of about 6 to 8 colleagues that are patiently waiting until we can get into these new facilities, because it's going to afford them a much more comfortable environment where we have workstations with all of our digitization equipment. It's truly going to be set up in a professional way, the way we've always hoped it could be. We were just hampered by space limitations up to this point.
It's just so good that it's got to this point, that it's continued to grow, and you've been so lucky to have these individuals come and help you with this. I'm so happy for you and for the future of all of the important documentation.
And I want to thank my fellow historians as well, because I've been garnering a lot of local media attention, and they keep referencing me by name. But I want to give a shout out to my board members, Mr. Barry Greenwood, Dr. Mark Rodiger with KUFOS, Rob Swiatek, Rod Dyke in Seattle, Washington, who has a vast collection. He looks to relocate here once we're in our new facilities, as well as Mr. Jan Aldridge, who has been a huge financial supporter as well as informational supporter, sending his files systematically over the last couple of years out here, and continues to do so. So I just want to make sure I call out the team. If we were the Beatles, I'm Paul McCartney, but I also have the guys in the back here. I've got the drummers and the guitarists.
Fantastic. Yeah, shout out to those guys. Absolutely. Now, before I would like to talk about just a few cases that you made me aware of recently from the area that are not so familiar. But my final question with regards to the archives would be, if you could get hold of any archive out there to add to your collection, which one would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. We have most of the large data holdings. I guess the only thing I would maybe say, again, in reference to large data holdings, someone asked me just the other day, have you reached out to MUFON? And we've been sending them our press releases. We haven't received any response back, but we, as a professional courtesy, we've been trying to update them. I just mailed them the press release the other day. If in the future they would like to have their archives of case files housed here at the National UFO Historical Records Center, I should say, that is something that we would welcome. Also, the National UFO Reporting Center, they have a lot of audio recordings. I've been in touch with Peter Davenport and Christian Stepien. That might be something else that we could look at as well. I would say those are probably the two large data sets that are out there that would be wonderful to have here. Again, it's a collaborative effort. We couldn't have this archive if it wasn't for KUFOS, NICAP, CSI, going back to the 1950s, APRO, and MUFON could be part of this. The National UFO Reporting Center could be part of this. I think it would be wonderful to have all of that data together, because it's funny, Vinny. I was just telling one of my colleagues the other day, I never thought in a million years we would be at a position with this much material where if someone came in and they would say, I would like to see the Socorro file, we can ask them in response, which one? Would you like to see the NICAP? Would you like to see the APRO? Now we have the ability to provide multiple case files on some of these classic historic cases. And I'm here to tell you, many of these reports, NICAP was able to interview certain individuals that APRO wasn't, and vice versa. And for the first time in history, we're bringing all that together where you can sit down and have a holistic view of some of these cases. And as we'll talk about, there's been a tremendous number of new insights into some of these old cases that we've discovered.
That's just music to my ears, being able to cross-reference from different files and collections for the same cases.
Yeah, all the information is not out there on the internet. I'm here to everyone thinks everything's on the internet. This stuff is not yet on the internet. This is new revelations that we're discovering in these historic cases.
Absolutely. Now, like I said, you'd mentioned you'd put me onto a few cases that I'd not really heard about at all. And so I wondered if you could just give us an overview of a couple of them, or whichever ones you think you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, well, one I have here, I try to tee up a few of these. We were talking about Socorro, so this would be kind of a nice segue. Shortly after Socorro, about 36 hours after that event, there was a similar sighting up near La Madera, New Mexico, which is in northern New Mexico. This was one that had garnered a lot of initial newspaper headlines. In fact, I think I have the headline right here. I'll share with you and your audience. I always love to share visuals when we're talking about this history. Here's the original Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper. And this, you can see Lonnie Zamora right there with an Air Force officer. But on the one side there, you see experts plan investigation at La Madera. It references that in addition to Socorro, there was this other case that was reported. Now, just Reader's Digest version, around 1 a.m, a gentleman by the name of Orlando Gallegos stepped out of his father's home, reportedly saw this object that he thought resembled a propane tank. Today we would say Tic Tac. Very similar roughly to what Zamora described, although that was more egg-shaped. He described that there was fire belching out the bottom of this object, and then it disappeared. Well, they notified authorities, and eventually the Air Force, as evidenced in that newspaper, stated, well, we'll send an investigative team out. If you go to the original Project Blue Book files, they had an investigation purportedly, but their investigation, at least as far as official documentation, consisted of 1 page of information. And it was essentially 2 half pages, but let's put it together and say 1 page. The practical upshot of that was the witness was drinking, so he was drunk, not reliable. And the fire in question was a trash dump area that just someone lit something on fire, and that's all it was. Well, we labored under that idea for decades. I always felt personally that they just kind of summarily dismissed this case. But again, that's just my opinion. I have nothing to base that on. Now I do. Going through the APRO files, one of the first things I did, I wanted to look for the Socorro file. And sure enough, there's great information on the part of APRO investigators regarding Socorro. Immediately behind that, though, we had this case file right here, La Madeira. And this is the original APRO folder. In this file, despite the fact we didn't have information from the Air Force, something that I would not have expected, we had information to Jim and Coral Lorenzen, and I hope I can angle this right so you can see it, from the New Mexico State Police.
Wow.
And in there was a series of letters, and hopefully you can see the header there. New Mexico State Police.
Yeah.
This was a letter dated, and I got to get my cheaters. Let me see here. May 20th, 1964. And it says, enclosed are photographs of the scene of a reported UFO landing near La Madeira, New Mexico on April 26th, 1964. He goes on describing the photos. He said, the focal point for photos numbered 1 through 5 was the center of the burned area, while number 6 was a supposed area that and a heat-shattered bottle, and goes on to talking about some other details. This was from D.C. Kingsbury, patrolman with the New Mexico State Police. We also have documentation in the NICAP files from Martin Vigil, who was the chief of New Mexico State Police at the time. But what we found in the envelope, as referenced in that cover letter, and I was shocked to find this, we have color photographs of the landing site at La Madeira.
Wow.
A series of photos. I've had to color enhance these using Photoshop because admittedly these old photos, you can see they kind of faded a little bit.
Yeah.
But they're close-ups of the landing site. And to Officer Kingsbury's credit, he numbered each photo, and this is the original pencil-drawn sketch that he drew, he sketched the area where the object purportedly landed or hovered.
My goodness me, that is
this
incredible.
This is something that we did not have courtesy of the Air Force, but thank goodness to the New Mexico State Police's credit, they documented this event with sketches and photographs.
That is incredible work. Wow.
Beyond that, I need to state this because, again, I think it's making us revisit and reframes what we think of some of these cases. The Air Force dismissed the witness as drunk. Coral Lorenzen, in her documentation from the case, stated that he was not drunk, according to his testimony. But the Air Force didn't arrive on the scene at least until about several days later, almost a week later after the event. Within about 48 hours, the 2 officers from New Mexico State Police were on the scene and interviewed him. So they were the first ones to interview the witness. When you read the letters, the correspondence to Jim and Coral Lorenzen, there is no reference or inference whatsoever that they deemed that this witness was drunk, that he was not credible. In fact, quite the contrary. So it's making us rethink this La Madeira case. Now, as if that's not interesting enough, I was recently contacted by a former TV news anchor that used to broadcast here in Albuquerque in the 1980s. He sent me a news series he did in the 80s that hadn't been seen publicly since on UFO cases in New Mexico. One of the things that he brought to my attention in this clip, which we now have here, which have been digitally remastered, was the fact that in addition to La Madeira and Socorro, there was a third location. Another location of an object that either hovered or landed. This was on the east side of the Sandia Mountains right here in Albuquerque. in a rural area, little village called Golden, New Mexico. And
Same day, or
no, the witness can't be specific to the date, but it fell in range along. We unfortunately I can't be more specific, Vinny. It was around the general time frame within a week or so of the Socorro La Madera event. But the 1983, I believe it was, newscast was on scene with Lee Williams, the reporter who I'm referencing, and the witness who observed it, as well as Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was actually in Albuquerque and was on location interviewing the witness. And this was one that was not reported in 1964.
that's incredible to have him there as well. Wow.
And according to the witness, individuals from Sandia and Kirtland Air Force Base came out and dug out these areas of dirt that, as he described, the rocks and the soil were fused together like it was smelted. And they came in and dug out these areas and either took it back to Kirtland or Sandia for analysis. But no more is heard. We have no official documentation because, they didn't investigate it back then. At least, ostensibly they didn't investigate it, but obviously some type of activity was going on and it drew their attention. So most people think of Socorro as an isolated event. It seems like it was a series of 3 events that actually took place, and maybe more that we don't even know of.
It's funny how things like that just come up and change everything, the whole case that you thought you knew.
And Vinny, this was 1964. Here we are in 2024. It's just crazy that I always laugh when people say, "Oh, that case, that's old. We know everything about it." No, you don't. We never know when we're going to find new insights like this. And the La Madera case, I have to say, that was somewhat validating to find this information and to have the news segment also that referenced it in the 1980s, looking back on it.
It's incredible to have the shape of the object, the flames as well. I mean, it's just, I love the details for things like that. That's really encouraging.
I'm looking forward to sharing this also with Lonnie Zamora's daughter, who I know. Her name's Diana, and I'm looking forward to her coming to our archives once we have our new building set up, because I'd like to share some of this information with her and her family.
That'd be so wonderful. Oh, that's great. Well, listen, David, thank you so much for being here today. I mean, it's been fantastic. I am such a huge proponent myself of historical archives and research, and to see you just going from strength to strength just really warms the heart. So,
well, and really, this is for you, and this is for the UFO community and for UFO researchers out there, because we're not bringing this together selfishly just for our needs. As you know, it's to afford the opportunity for everyone to have access. And one of the big goals that we'll be focused on moving forward is raising significant dollars. And we're hoping we might actually have some help with the Intel Corporation, who is based here. One of their facilities is based here in Rio Rancho. We're going to try to facilitate some dialogue between them now that we're affiliated with the school system, to see about getting a dedicated server and an IT specialist, because we have literally terabytes of data in the form of documents, photos, videos, audio. We want to make this available to everyone. We understand everyone can't come to Albuquerque to access it. But for those that can, great. But for those that can't, I just want them to know that we do want to try to raise money and significant funding and support to where we can have a dedicated server to upload all of this material to the worldwide community, and for free. I mean, we operate on donations, unlike some organizations and individuals out there that are charging for this, that, the other thing. I don't think that your economic bracket should limit you to having access to this information. My attitude is this information, this history belongs to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to make sure that any relevant links are in the description of this video, so people can, keep up with everything that's happening and help out in any way. And I offer that to myself. If there's ever anything I can do, however small, please do not hesitate.
No, this is fantastic, just to get the word out. And that's, a lot of people say, well, I'd like to help, but I don't know how. Just spread the word about what we're doing.
Yeah, 100%. So there you go, everyone that's watching. Please help spread the word. And as always, I thank you all for watching. Thank you to David once again, and we'll see you again soon. Take care and goodbye.